Welcome back to the shop, everyone. So sitting in the car, I got the laptop connected to the ECU, and what I got to do right now is I got to switch one of my gauges out. So I've got a fuel PSI gauge here, and it's not showing me fuel PSI. So in a second here, I will start up the car and I'll show you what the fuel pressure gauge is showing, and you'll see that it's also showing the same thing as the oil pressure gauge. And then if we go onto the laptop and show you on the software that, you know, it's showing the oil pressure instead of the fuel pressure. And so I'll just quickly show you that, and then I'll tell you how we're going to fix this problem. All right, so let's get this puppy fired up. Add a bit more cranking fuel back. Okay. So I don't know if you'll be able to hear me, but we've got 78 psi of fuel pressure apparently. We have 78 psi of oil pressure. And if we look on the laptop, we have 78 psi of oil pressure, but only 52 psi of fuel pressure. So obviously, something ain't right. Okay, so if you're new to the problem, my fuel PSI gauge shows the oil PSI, and that's corroborated by what the computer is showing. It's showing, 78 pounds of oil pressure, and both these gauges are showing the same thing. I didn't clue into this until like a week or two ago when I was going down the road, and I noticed my fuel pressure is showing the same thing that my oil pressure is going. As I rev up, the oil pressure comes up, so does the fuel pressure. So, how do I fix this? Well, I called and I talked to Holly's tech support. I chatted with an awesome guy there. His name is Ryan. And I explained what's happening. I said, I got this fuel pressure gauge, I got this oil pressure gauge. They're both showing the same thing. And since these gauges are CAN bus, I believe that the programming on the fuel pressure was programmed incorrectly. So it's showing oil pressure instead of fuel pressure. And he accurately pointed out, well, it could be that they put the wrong face on the gauge as well. And I said, yep. That's entirely possible as well. I don't know how whoever puts these gauges together does it. Do they, look at the gauge and then program it for the CAN bus, or do they just have a whole bunch in a row and then they just grab faces and throw it on it? In any case, it doesn't matter. For whatever reason, my fuel pressure gauge is reading my oil pressure. So I bought these gauges from Holly because, Ryan said, well, you're gonna have to contact, whoever you bought it from. And I said, well, actually, bought it from you guys. And he was like, oh, really? I was like, yeah. He's like, oh, okay, so you bought it back on this order? I said, yep. I know it was a while ago. He said, yep, no problem. We'll work something out. We'll figure it out with you, and we'll get you a right gauge. So I have that new fuel pressure gauge right here. And so we are going to go through and get this installed in the car, and then I'll talk about some differences between the old gauge and the new gauge, and we'll work through those as we get to them. But for now, let's just get this old gauge out of here. These gauges have this little ring on the back, so I'll have to pull the gauge panel, undo the screws, pull the gauge panel forward, undo this collet, and then we can pull the gauge out. Let's get to it. Alright, so we got the gauge out, and we're now on the bench. Please pay attention to the CNC control box over here that's taken apart and ripped apart. That will be in a different video dedicated to the CNC plasma stuff. But we got our fuel pressure gauge, our old one here, and it's very simple. There's this connector that came with it, 3 wires, gauge power, gauge ground, and then illumination power, and then CAN bus in, CAN bus out. Pretty simple stuff. Again, I don't know how these are programmed or how they work internally. I mean, I wonder if there's like a dip switch or something inside. Maybe I'll take it apart and see just to see if there's a way to change it. But in any case, we have this here new gauge. So fuel PSI gauge looks very similar. Obviously it's newer. Now on the back, we got some different connections. So we have this connector, which comes out, but has the same three ground, power, and then illumination. But it's got a couple of other connectors, and there might actually be one more that I have misplaced because I need to be able to plug one of these cans into this guy. Let me just go find that real quick. Found it. It was just in the car. So the way this works now is this 6-pinner plugs in, and then if you were going new gauge to gauge, you're going to have this in and this out. This in and this out, and each gauge is going to have these. And you know, if this gauge was an oil pressure gauge, for example, this output would just come and plug into its input. So you know, these are going to be paired connectors. You would never actually do this because this wouldn't do anything. Well, that's how it would work. Whereas before, we just had multiple of these little shorty wires. You just plug it into the back, and it jumps in from gauge to gauge. So now, this is going to plug into this adapter, and this is now going to plug into this input. And this is how we are going to get CAN bus. So this is going to plug into the back of the other gauge that I had in there, or you know, into the back of whatever gauge this was plugged into. Now the problem is, the car is wired with the mating connector in the car. This does not have that connector. I really wish they would have shipped these new gauges with these old connectors, because then I wouldn't have to do anything. I could just, you know, plug it in and away we go. But unfortunately, it ships with this super duper long, and this being super long is no problem at all. In fact, it's probably better in a lot of situations. And if I recall correctly, you only need to plug this into one. When you daisy chain this, it daisy chains power and ground. I think. So we still need the gauge module, which I have in the car, which is, this is going to connect to here. Yeah, so 12 is accessory power, main gauge power, the white's the lighting, black's the ground. And then we've got Holley EFI analog style CAN gauges require the 55130 module to function. I have that. It's on the little silver plate in the car. The module is compatible with any Terminator, HP Dominator, or Sniper ECU. The module can be connected to any single gauge, and additional gauges may be daisy chained in order. Only one module is required per vehicle, allowing the user to daisy chain as many gauges together as they wish without having to purchase additional modules. Important, disconnect the battery part installation. I'm fucking that part up. That's okay. Mount the gauges, install the gauge, install power, ground, and lighting as wire shown in the diagram. Daisy chain the gauges together in any order with the included stereo cables / jumper harness. Connect gauge module as shown, reconnect the battery, start the engine, ensure all gauges display the appropriate values. So looking at this, we connect one, and then we just daisy chain the rest together. The second gauge doesn't show this connector being plugged in. So I think you might only need to connect power, ground, and gauge illumination to one, and then these connectors will transfer and control the rest of them. So the way that could happen is, since all of these gauges talk on CAN bus, and you know what CAN bus is a protocol that lets different devices talk together, this can talk to all the other gauges and say, okay, you know, you have power and you have ground, that's all the device needs to work. That's all the illumination needs. So when this first module receives the illumination signal, internally it says, hey, all the rest of my gauges, turn on your lighting, because we need lighting. So I don't think this would be required for all the other gauges, which is actually awesome. That makes the wiring a lot more simpler in the car. You only need 3 wires coming up to a single gauge instead of the cluster of wires that I have right now. If it wouldn't cost me like $1,000, I would probably switch all the gauges out to these new ones. But unfortunately, that's going to be way too expensive at this point, and I don't want to do that. You know, I worked with Holly to get this gauge, so we'll use it as is. But yeah, so my plan is I'm going to chop this connector off, give me a little bit of room. I'll chop this off in roughly the same area just to make it the same. I'll solder these together, and then we can throw the gauge in the car and test it. So I'm not going to talk about soldering the wires or all that. I'll just show that on time lapse, and then time lapse getting this back in the car and testing it. And okay, so without even firing the car, I already know this is working properly. If I cycle the ignition, you can hear the fuel pump running, and after the gauge does its thing, you can see it's up around, you know, 35 psi and dropping, and that's because it's draining, all the pressure's draining back into the tank. But let's just run this and make sure it should idle right around 52-ish. Dead on. Beautiful. Well, that is all that we are doing in this week. As always, if you've stuck around this long, I'd like to thank you for viewing, and we'll see you in the next one.